Okay, so time for some honesty. I bought a 5090, a very expensive top-of-the-range graphics card, and I think it was a mistake. Over the last few years, I've gamed on everything from all of the current-gen consoles, the Switch, my Stream Deck, all the way up to my current PC, which has a 5090, a 9800X 3D CPU, and is an absolute beast. And what I've experienced might shock you, and that's what I want to talk about in this video. When you're building a PC, obviously everybody has different needs and concerns. I'm sure there's people with very specific needs who absolutely require a high-end PC, and those people already know what they're going to use each particular component for. But that wasn't my experience, and that's what I want to share with you. I might even be able to save you some money. My context was that I wanted to be able to play games at max graphics and record that gameplay at 4K while also streaming to both YouTube and Twitch. Previously in my gaming PC I had a 3080, which was definitely no slouch. It was a good GPU, but getting 120 frames per second in games often required a lot of sacrifices. There'd be little dips below that, and 4K gaming was just an incredible pain to get running acceptably for pretty much all new and sort of current games I was playing. And admittedly, I was a tiny bit swayed by the fact that I'd never had a top-of-the-range PC. I've been PC gaming for a very long time. Like, I was playing the first Doom when that came out. That's how old I am. And all that time, I never quite had something that was the best in class. I had decent stuff, you know, I had a 1080, which was absolutely awesome, and I used it for a very long time, but I never had the 1080 Ti or the Titan that some people I knew had. Then I had the 3080, but I didn't have the 3090, and then, you know, the 4090 that a lot of content creator friends I knew had. And I was always a bit jealous of those people who had the current best thing, like, oh, they must not have any problems at all with their graphic settings or with their recording settings. Everything must just be perfect for them. They must be able to make better content than I could possibly do on their machines. So I decided this time around I'd saved up some money to build a PC, and I decided I was going to go all out and get the top of the range GPU, the 5090. And along with that, I got 64 gigabytes of RAM, I had 3 NVMe drives, I had the CPU, like I said, the AMD Ryzen 9800X 3D that lots of websites at the time were saying this is the best CPU for gaming. It was a very fancy PC, and it cost me about £3,000. And I started realizing very, very quickly why spending that kind of money on a PC just isn't worth it. Now that £3,000 figure, by the way, that's very much an approximation because the graphics card was just under £2,000 and the CPU was very expensive. Then everything else was kind of, some of it was stuff that I already had and was kind of cobbled together from a previous PC. But overall, let's say £3,000 for a nice round number. The truth is it was probably a bit more expensive than that. So what problems did I run into? First of all, 4K gaming. There were immediately headaches with streaming and recording at 4K. I could play games at 4K and get some really impressive frame rates, although not everything would immediately be running at 120 frames per second at 4K with everything turned up to ultra. Lots of games just aren't actually optimized that well, especially at the higher end. But once I included streaming and recording at 4K, that causes so many problems that you might not think about when you're recording at 1440p or 1080p. There's things like the enormous file sizes, obviously. 4K video creates huge files. And then there's also, you'll suddenly find, oh, you've been recording for the last hour and actually the video started stuttering about halfway through because at some point your encoder couldn't keep up. Or OBS would straight up crash after a while. And when I googled it, people were just like, oh yeah, that happens with the 50 series or, you know, high-end graphics cards, even the 4090 sometimes. And like I said, some games I would think, okay, I'm running at 4K, I've got the best GPU, I can turn everything up to max. Some games just wouldn't hit the frame rates I wanted to, or they at least weren't consistent with it. There's lots and lots of games where pretty much no matter what hardware you throw at it, if you have everything turned up to maximum, there's just something that's not optimized well enough, so the computer can't render each frame consistently fast enough, and it's going to end up stuttering, or it's going to end up dropping a little bit below 120 frames per second when you've got all of those graphics turned up at 4K. And then, despite all of that, like, I overcame most of those problems. Yes, I had to re-record a lot of things. Yes, it took a lot longer to edit videos, and it took a lot longer to process them and upload them to YouTube. YouTube is weirdly a pain about 4K videos. Sometimes it will start processing them, and the 1080p version will take way longer to process than the video would have if you just uploaded it in 1080p to begin with. But anyway, I overcame a lot of those problems, uploaded loads of videos in 4K, and during that period was probably the time that I got the least views on my channel out of the last 3 or 4 years. Not one person mentioned, "Oh wow, this looks really good in 4K," or "Oh wow, I'm so glad that you're releasing your videos in 4K." Even though YouTube have said as a company that, you know, people watching on 4K TVs is the biggest growing market on YouTube. There's a lot of people now who watch stuff on the YouTube app on their TV at 4K. Nobody really cared that my gaming videos were at 4K at all. Like, they've gone from 1440p to 4K. I would say I'd spent so much time on the quality of them was actually much, much better. It was very crisp. Still didn't matter. Basically nobody cared. Not a single person complimented the picture quality or 4K availability. And this was kind of gutting, because I'd been going through so much faff to get these videos ready and to make videos at this quality, that when people didn't care about it, it really made me question why I was doing it in the first place. And don't get me wrong, it's not just me being stupid about PCs and struggling, and that's where the faff comes from. There just is a lot of faff with PCs and content creation in general, and by faff I mean having to change settings, checking things with drivers, changing things not just in the game settings or the OBS settings or the video editing software settings, but also Windows settings or BIOS settings that might change things. There's tons of faff. And then on top of that, the 50 series drivers, the drivers for the new Nvidia cards, have been pretty bad so far. There's been lots of bugs. It's been pretty widely reported on. While a lot of games work absolutely fine with them, lots of productivity software either just didn't recognize them at first, or didn't care about all of their extra new features, didn't like the way they did some things, and there were just so many bugs and issues where when I googled how to solve them, people were just like, "Oh yeah, if you're on a 50 series card, that's just how that is now." And that sucks. That was really, really disheartening. Since upgrading, I've actually spent more time troubleshooting and getting buried in graphics menus and 3D video settings menus in my Nvidia control panel than I ever did on my old PC, which kind of defeated the point. I wanted to be able to just set everything to max at 4K and get on with playing and recording games, but it hadn't really worked out that way. And then I noticed while I was looking around at how other people were dealing with it, that a lot of popular creators and streamers were still releasing content at 1440p, or even 1080p, you know, the people who predominantly stream on Twitch. And no one was complaining. Now, you can go look at videos, gaming videos that are only at 1080p on YouTube, and you don't get loads of people complaining about the resolution. I would get annoyed when, like, Activision would release Call of Duty trailers on YouTube at 1080p. I was always like, why aren't they doing these things in 4K? But the vast majority of people just don't care at all. So I was questioning why I was bothering with all of that faff, the long upload times, YouTube taking forever to process every video. So I just switched back to 1440p. I decided to swap my monitors back around, so I was back on a 1440p monitor, because frustratingly 4K monitors don't display 1440p very well because it's not a clear ×4 multiplication, so you end up with pixels that are like stretched a little bit. But now I've switched back to 1440p, not a single person's mentioned that either. No one said, "Oh, your videos look worse," or "your streams look worse," or anything like that. Nobody seems to have noticed at all. And now every game's completely stable again. Recordings have much smaller file sizes. YouTube doesn't take as long to process the videos anymore. And OBS seems way more stable and isn't throwing hissy fits. And that was just one thing that made me regret getting the 5090. Then I started really paying attention to the games that I was playing, now at 1440p, but with everything still maxed out on my absolute beast of a PC. And, most of the time it was at 120 frames a second. For reference, my monitor can do 165 frames a second, 165 hertz, but I tend to just lock everything to 120 frames per second, because then when I'm recording at 60, it's just recording every other frame and it's smooth rather than ending up with odd stutters. But anyway, so I was playing games 1440p, everything completely maxed out at 120 frames per second, and I wasn't enjoying the games more than when I played them on other platforms and didn't have that experience. Let's give you some examples. Doom: The Dark Ages. I just recently played through that entire game. I finished it on Sunday. I started off playing that at 4K, and then I switched to 1440p for everything, so then at 1440p, but with everything maxed out, everything set to ultra, high frame rate, and I thought it looked great. It is a good looking game. It's a brand new game that's taking advantage of some new technology. Looked awesome. When you load up Doom: The Dark Ages, it even says, hey, you need to have the latest NVIDIA drivers, otherwise you can't really play this game. So when I first played it, I had to download the brand new drivers, get all that installed and everything. Then I wanted to carry on playing the game downstairs, where I put my old gaming PC. So it's on a 4K TV, capable of 120 frames per second and everything like that. It's a very nice TV. But that's on my old gaming PC, and I loaded it up. This has the 3080 in it, by the way. Load it up, it still came up saying, hey, you need to install the new drivers and stuff, and I was like, I can't be bothered with that. I just skipped past that menu or whatever it was, that prompt. Just loaded up the game on my 3080, on the old drivers, and the game looked exactly the same. The game looked and performed exactly the same as it did on my 5090. I honestly couldn't tell a difference. Even though I was now on a 4K TV, I probably had DLSS on quality, I imagine, to get it running like that. But it was running well, it looked great, I played through basically the entire rest of the game like that, and at no point was I thinking, oh, I really want to go back upstairs to play it on my desk PC, because that's where the game looks better. My wife even started playing Doom on her Xbox Series X, which was, weirdly, at some point we were playing it together. We've got two TVs set up, it is a dream setup, so I had it on my TV, she had her TV on the right, she was playing on it on an Xbox. And yes, when you're comparing the two directly, you could tell hers didn't look quite as detailed. It didn't look quite as sharp. But it still looked really good, and I don't think it would have affected my enjoyment of the game one bit playing it on that. And that's kind of crazy. Playing it on a £400 console is the same, basically, the same effective enjoyment from the game as playing it on a £3,000 PC. It just felt like the bonuses from playing it on a very expensive PC aren't important when you're just playing the game. Now, of course, I'm sure Linus Tech Tips will get Doom: The Dark Ages running at 8K or 16K or something, and they'll be at some absurdly high frame rate on a special monitor that they've bought from China or something. But I'm not playing 8K, and I don't have an absurdly high frame rate monitor, and I'm willing to bet a lot of you don't either. So like a lot of people, I have a 4K TV. Like I said, it is one that's capable of doing 120 frames per second. But the Xbox was coping absolutely fine with that setup. It made the 4K TV look really good while I was playing Doom on it. So what was the point of all that extra horsepower? I'm sure if I analysed a video or a screenshot from the game, I could pick out saying, oh, this isn't quite as reflective, or this reflection isn't as sharp, there's not as many particles here or whatever. But the reality of it is that the game looks close enough to being the same as not to notice. I'd say playing on a nicer screen, so playing on my 4K TV as opposed to my desk monitor, probably has a much more pronounced effect than any of the graphic settings. For another example, one of my favourite games of the last few years, Expedition 33, Clair Obscur. I started playing that on my 5090, that's when I streamed it and I recorded a bit of video from it, telling everyone it's the best game ever. Maybe not ever, but it's definitely an incredible game, it's up there. And so I started playing it on my PC, and then I switched to playing it on my Steam Deck, because I had a long flight to Singapore, 13-hour flight, so I was like, I know, I'm really enjoying this game at the moment, I'll put that on my Steam Deck. And it's not even verified for the Steam Deck. You can get it running at 30 frames a second at like 720p. And while it does look gorgeous on my 5090, and it looks blurry and way less detailed, and the frame rate wasn't very good on my Steam Deck, within just a few minutes of playing the game, I was just as immersed and really, really enjoying it. Even if objectively, it's a much worse version of the game, my enjoyment of the game was the exact same. One thing that I really noticed with that game is that no matter what kind of graphic settings you've got or anything like that, the audio is the same, and the music in Expedition 33 is such an important part of the experience. And I was getting, a really, really good experience through that, which would have been exactly the same on my super expensive PC. The art style too is so strong in that even though the game was lower resolution and lower frame rate, it still looked beautiful. It was still immersive. It's still exciting to see the new worlds. And obviously, because it's turn-based combat, the frame rate was way less of a problem than it normally would be. And again, I've watched my wife play Expedition 33 on the Xbox, and the experience is so similar to the PC version, despite the Xbox being a sixth of the price of my PC. One final game example, Indiana Jones. Indiana Jones was actually the first game that made me think about making this video. Indiana Jones was actually more fun when I was playing it on my Xbox Series X, where I didn't have to think about graphic settings, I didn't have to think about what I could get running at 4K with fancy ray tracing settings enabled, and what would be an acceptable frame rate. That was one of the games that I ran it with my 5090, and I couldn't turn everything up to the max settings comfortably. I had to kind of keep tweaking things and be like, okay, do I want DLSS? Do I want frame gen? Do I want to turn some of the ray tracing or some of the shadows down or something like that in order to be able to keep a consistent frame rate? I was constantly returning to the graphics options to see if I could tweak something. And I was never sure if a slightly nicer image quality was worth the dips in performance. When I was playing the PC version of Indiana Jones, I was constantly distracted by trying to get the best possible experience. Whereas when I played on Xbox, I just accepted the experience they'd given me and thoroughly enjoyed the game. And that was a much, much better way to play it. Through all of this, it is undoubtedly nice being able to run games on extreme settings. It's great when I get a code for a new game and I just start it up and I'm like, yep, put it at 1440p or, used to put it at 4K, turn everything up to ultra, and sometimes I'll see frame rates that are double or more what I was used to in the past. But with my monitor locked to 120 frames per second anyway, I never feel like there's all that much of an improvement to the actual experience of playing games. And it's become clear why, that games aren't designed or optimized for super high-end graphics cards. And that completely makes sense, but I never thought about it before. People who own these really expensive graphics cards are such a tiny part of the audience, it doesn't make sense to design anything around them. Instead, games are usually optimized for consoles or, PCs that are in some way affordable, and they're designed to be perfectly playable there. On a high-end PC, you usually do have some extra options to enable, but they don't tend to make the games more enjoyable. They just provide a bit of technical spectacle for people who understand what they're looking at, something that the people at Digital Foundry can pore over and admire. Now, all of this came to a head when I realized that the Switch 2 is coming out in a couple of weeks, and I'm so excited to play Mario Kart World, or whatever it's called, the new Super Mario Kart. I'm super excited to play that. And at no point have I considered how powerful is the Switch 2. Like, what processor is in the CPU? What processor is in the Switch 2? What graphics chipset does it have? How much VRAM does it have? I haven't thought about any of that because I know Nintendo will have made a great game for that hardware. And even if I could run Mario Kart World on my very fancy PC, I don't think it would be any more fun. Maybe it would be smoother, maybe it would be higher resolution. Sure, maybe I'd be able to get some ray-traced reflections on the side of Luigi's helmet. I'd be able to see Mario's face or something like that. But I don't think it would make the game any more fun. I think the idea of a game being or looking good enough has been lost a bit with some gamers like me. And with graphics definitely stagnating a little bit over the last decade, although GTA 6 is probably about to change that next year, old hardware is still incredibly capable While I was researching this video, I found an article that was something about, oh, is a 1080 still a good graphics card now? That's the graphics card I had 2 builds ago, so like a decade ago now it feels like. And the article was like saying, yeah, the 1080 is still a great graphics card. You can still play a lot of current games. There's only a few games you won't be able to play. You can still have a great experience with it. And that's crazy to me. Like, I've sort of tricked myself into thinking I need to be able to keep up, that my old hardware is just obsolete. But it's just not true at all. Gaming PCs don't become obsolete very quickly anymore. GTA 5 is still one of the most impressive games available, and you can play it on an Xbox 360 at 30 frames per second. And that is more than playable. And that's a console from 2 decades ago that didn't cost very much money in the first place. So, if you're getting by with a gaming PC right now, or you've got a current gen console, an Xbox Series X or a PlayStation 5, and you're sitting there thinking, oh, I wish I could just crank that frame rate up a little bit more, or run things on ultra settings, personally, I'd say save your money. It's not going to be as good as you think it's going to be. Maybe go for a more modest upgrade, or something that makes the usability of your PC better, like, getting a new, faster hard drive. That's always, if anyone says, oh, I want to upgrade my PC, what's the first thing I should do? If they haven't got an NVMe drive, I'm always like, yeah, get that, because that'll make everything about your PC feel a bit better. Having a nice, fast hard drive is absolutely awesome. You can experience some of the best games ever made, and some of the games that will be made over the next few years, on a £400 console right now. And if you spent an extra £2,600, you're not going to enjoy those games anymore. In the future, when you're looking back at your favourite games, you're not going to remember if you played them at 60 frames per second or 300 frames per second or 1080p or 4K. You're going to remember the game design, the story, the music, and that just doesn't change. Think back to your favourite games of all time now. Do you remember what the frame rate was? How much it bothered you? The resolution? The shader settings? Now again, as a disclaimer for this entire video, I know there are more effective uses for all this hardware. Having this PC has enabled me as a content creator to switch to a single PC setup, which has been awesome for me. It's a lot less complicated. I can run 2 streams and record while playing games. I can confidently hit 120 frames per second at 1440p with great image quality. I can edit and render videos faster than I ever could before. And for people who are involved in like animation or simulations or AI, I'm sure there's even more advantages to the 5090. I don't entirely regret buying it. I definitely am happy just having a top-of-the-line GPU for once, and I'm sure once the drivers are a bit more sorted out, it'll be even better. But it has made me realise that better hardware and spending more money on your PC doesn't mean your gaming experience is transformed. If I had to do all of this again and I just wanted to play games and I didn't care about making content, I'd just stick with my Xbox, to be honest.